The auction was nearly over. The lights above the cages began to flicker as the alien merchants packed up their datapads and credits. Each cage had been sold creatures bought, bartered, or taken by the highest bidder. Some were bought for labor, some for pleasure, and some for pain. But one cage remained at the very end of the long metal hallway. A small figure sat in silence, forgotten and alone. She was young, maybe 16 in human years. Her skin was pale lavender. Glowing faintly under the dim auction lights, she had silver eyes, but they looked dead, like they hadn't cried in years because tears had stopped coming, thin and starved. She wore only a torn cloth to cover herself. Chains bound her wrists and ankles, and there was a strange collar on her neck, pulsing red with light. A merchant passed by and scoffed. Still. Here, huh? Worthless junk. Another laughed. Defective stock. No one wants a mute creature who doesn't even stand. Just scrap her, one suggested. Her kind's dangerous anyway, but the slavers didn't bother. She wasn't worth the cost of a bullet, so they just left her locked up. Planning to dump her on some garbage moon later, the lights dimmed further. The auction-ending alarm echoed. The crowd dispersed, and the grand doors began to shut. The girl didn't move, didn't cry, didn't even blink. She just sat there. Her knees pulled to her chest, as if waiting for the darkness to swallow her forever. Then, footsteps, not heavy boots like the slavers. Not clinking metal like the guards. These were slow, steady, thoughtful. Someone was walking toward the last cage, alone, a human, tall, wrapped in a weathered coat. His face shadowed under a worn hood. He stopped in front of her cage. For a few seconds, he said nothing. He just looked at her. Looked. Like no one had in a long, long time. Not like a product, not like a creature, not like a thing. Just a person. Sitting there in silence, the girl slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. There was no hope in them, no curiosity, only the quiet surrender. Of someone who had stopped believing long ago? She yours? The human asked a nearby merchant, his voice low and calm. The merchant looked annoyed. Nah, she's leftover trash, defective, mute, probably broken inside too. She dangerous? She's nothing. Doesn't talk, doesn't move, doesn't even scream when beaten. She'll have a name. The merchant shrugged, never asked, never cared. The human looked at her again, then took something from his pocket. A single credit chip, not much, barely worth anything. He held it out. Without saying another word, the merchant blinked. You serious? I'll take her, the human said. There was a long pause. Then the merchant laughed. Fine, she's yours. Take the freak. The cage opened with a loud hiss, metal grinding against rust. The girl didn't move, didn't believe. It was real. The human walked in, slowly, knelt down, and reached out his hand. She flinched, her body tensing like she expected pain. But the hand didn't strike, didn't grab, it simply waited. Open and still. I'm not here to hurt you, he said softly. You don't have to come. But I'm offering you something no one else did. The girl looked at his hand for a long time, and then, slowly, shakily, she moved, her fingers touched his, weak and trembling, and for the first time in years, her chains made a soft clink, not from dragging, but from motion. He gently helped her up. Wrapping his coat around her shoulders, she couldn't speak. But her eyes followed his every move now, as if trying to understand, as they walked away from the auction house. The girl looked back once. The cages were empty. The lights fading, but in her heart, something unfamiliar stirred a spark. A question, maybe even the first piece of hope. And beside her, the human walked in silence. Not as her owner, not as her buyer, but as the first soul who had whispered for words she never thought she'd hear. I'll take her, he had said, and something inside her, something long buried, began to awaken, The walk from the auction house to the human's transport was silent. The girl didn't ask where they were going. She didn't even ask his name. Her steps were small and unsteady, as if she wasn't sure if her legs would work. Each time he glanced at her, she looked away, afraid to meet his eyes. The transport was old, patched together with parts from many alien worlds. Inside, it was warm and clean. Nothing fancy, but safe. The human motioned for her to sit on a bench covered with soft blankets. He offered her a small bottle of water and a nutrient bar. She stared at them, her hands unmoving. "It's not poisoned," he said quietly. Then took a bite of the bar himself. She still didn't move. He left the food near her and sat across the room. Not forcing her, she watched him from the corner of her eyes. There was no collar remote in his hand. No whip, no command. It confused her more than anything. She waited for the pain to come, but nothing happened. Minutes passed, and then hours. The transport lifted into orbit, and the stars stretched outside the window. The girl finally reached for the water. Slowly, she drank one small sip, then two. Then she finished the bottle, but still, she said nothing. The human didn't ask her anything. He just checked the controls, adjusted the ship's direction, and returned to his seat. Time passed again, quietly. Then he stood up and walked to a cabinet in the back. He pulled out clean clothes, loose, soft, and warm, and placed them near her without a word. "There's a bathroom down that hall," he said. "You don't have to use it, but it's there." The girl looked at the clothes, then looked at him. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out, just air. She clutched the coat he had given her tighter around her, unsure, afraid, that night. She didn't sleep. She sat curled in the corner of the bench, eyes wide open, watching the door. Any sound made her flinch. But the human never entered her space. He went to another room, closed the door, and didn't come out until morning. The next day, he tried again. He left a tray of warm food on the table, a mix of soft bread, vegetables, and fruit. She didn't touch it at first. Only after he walked away did she crawl over and sniff it. Then she ate like someone who had forgotten what hunger felt like. When she finished, she cleaned the tray and placed it back where she found it. He noticed but didn't say anything. Instead, he nodded once. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt strange to her, like a thank you without words. She hadn't been thanked in years. Maybe ever. Later that day, he brought her a soft blanket and motioned toward a second room. "This one's yours," he said. "You can lock the door if you want." The girl stepped inside slowly, her hands shaking. There was a bed, a light, and a window showing the stars. It was more than she'd ever had. She stood there, stunned. He didn't follow her. He walked away, giving her space. She sat on the bed, touching the sheets. They were real, not metal, not dirty, not cold. She pulled the blanket over her legs and closed her eyes, but still didn't sleep. Her body couldn't trust peace yet. That evening, while adjusting the ship's direction again, the human spoke gently. "You don't have to talk, but if you ever want to, I'll listen." She didn't respond, but the words stayed in her mind, repeating like a whisper. For days, the routine continued. Food in the morning, space to breathe, no orders, no threats. He talked sometimes small things. Nothing personal, about the stars, about the ship, about places he'd been. It wasn't much. But it wasn't silence either. Then one night, something changed. She walked into the common area holding the clean clothes he gave her. She wore them now, and her collar was gone. She had removed it herself, tossing it into a waste chute. Her silver eyes looked less empty, not full, but less broken. He looked up from his tools and nodded again. She stared at him, lips trembling. She opened her mouth, but only a faint sound came out. A whisper, cracked and dry, like dust. "Why?" she asked. The word hit him harder than anything. Not because of what she said, but because it was the first sound her voice had made. He stood slowly, careful not to startle her. He answered simply, because someone should have. Tears welled. In her eyes, her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor. She wasn't crying loudly, just breathing in sharp, painful gasps, as if feeling emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. The human knelt down, but didn't touch her. He just sat with her, waiting. She didn't need saving. She needed space to heal. That night, when she returned to her room, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. And for the first time, she whispered something to herself, not her name. She didn't have one yet, but a small, fragile thought. I'm not a slave anymore. She stood in the hallway, holding the cup of warm liquid he gave her. It smelled sweet, something made from earth roots, he said. She didn't know the name, but she liked the warmth in her hands. The ship's hum was soft around her, like a quiet lullaby in space. The stars outside blinked in silence. And she wondered if she had ever really looked at them before. The human was sitting at the small table, fixing something. Wires, old circuits, maybe a part of the ship's memory bank. She had been watching him for the last few days. Not just his hands, but his face, always calm. Never harsh. He didn't lock her door, didn't follow her, didn't treat her like a thing. She sipped the drink and finally spoke, her voice soft. Like wind. Why? He didn't look up, just asked gently, why what? She stepped forward, fingers tightening around the cup. Why did you buy me? She whispered. There was no anger in her voice, only confusion and fear. He set down the tool and looked at her with tired eyes. I saw you, he said. Just sitting there. All the others were gone. But you didn't even look up. She lowered her gaze, her chest tight. I thought. Maybe I wasn't worth it, she said slowly. Not worth saving. He shook his head. That's not true. She raised her eyes again, this time holding his stare longer. You didn't know me. You still don't. He smiled a little. I didn't need to. I've seen enough cages in my life, he continued. And I've seen what happens when no one opens them. She didn't speak again for a long moment. Then she sat down across from him. Setting her cup on the table, you're not like the others, she said, her voice clearer now. I kept thinking maybe it's a trick. Maybe you want something. I do, he replied calmly. She flinched slightly, her hands ready to pull back. But he finished. I want you to heal. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. No one had ever said that to her before. Heal. The word felt strange, unreal. You don't owe me anything, he added. Not your body, not your service, not your trust. I just didn't want to walk away from someone still in chains. She looked down at her wrists, where red marks remained from the bindings. They still burned sometimes, but now they reminded her that the chains were gone. Really gone? I'm not used to this, she admitted. I know, he said quietly. Neither am I. She tilted her head, surprised. You've been a slave too. No, he answered, but I've been betrayed. He leaned back, eyes darkening. I was a soldier once, left behind after a mission went wrong. Everyone thought I was dead. Turns out, no one came looking anyway. Her heart squeezed in her chest. They were from different worlds, but pain had no species. Silence fell between them again. Not cold, not tense, just thoughtful. After some time, she asked, what do you want me to do now? He smiled softly. Anything you want. You can stay here, leave when you're ready, eat, sleep, talk. Or don't. You are not a prisoner. She stared at the stars through the window behind him. They didn't look so distant now, more like tiny lights guiding her somewhere new. I don't remember who I was before, she said after a while. They took my name, my voice, even my thoughts. They called me it or Subject 76. He nodded slowly, listening carefully. Well, he said, then it's time we start again, not with what they gave you, but with what you choose. She blinked. Choose? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. He tapped the screen and showed her a list of words names. Earth names, alien names, new names, forgotten ones. You don't have to pick one now. He said, just know, one day you can. Her hands trembled again. She didn't know what choosing a name meant, not really. But the idea that she could without asking permission felt powerful. Like a tiny part of her cage had opened wider. That night, she sat in her room, looking at her reflection. She touched her face, her hair, the soft clothes he gave her, and in a whisper, barely loud enough for the ship to hear, she repeated his words, not what they gave me, but what I choose. She didn't sleep, but she didn't stay frozen either. Instead, she began writing on a screen in her room. Letters, shapes, names, memories, pieces of herself that she thought were lost. Outside, the stars waited, and in the next room, the human who had once been forgotten himself sat quietly, letting her grow at her own pace. He didn't rescue her to own her. He rescued her because no one else did, and because, deep down, broken souls could still find light if someone just reached out. Asterisk. The girl stood in front of the mirror, tracing her fingers over her wrists. The red marks from the chains had faded a little, but the feeling still remained. She remembered the sound they made, the cold grip, the way her skin had been burned when she moved too fast. They weren't just chains. They had been alive, pulsing, connected to her nerves, a cruel invention of her captors. The human had noticed her staring at her arms more often. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He just brought her ointment for the scars and left her alone with her thoughts. But tonight felt different. She sat down across from him at the table and placed something on the surface. Small, broken piece of metal, part of her collar. Didn't tell you the full truth, she said softly. He looked at her carefully, waiting. I wasn't just captured because I was weak, she continued. They took me because I was dangerous. The human didn't speak, but he leaned forward. Slightly, her voice shook as she went on. My species. We're called Valeri, not many left anymore. They fear us because of what we carry inside, he asked gently. What do you carry? She tapped her chest, above her heart. Energy, she said. Raw, unstable energy, from birth. Our bodies adapt to control it. Some use it to heal, some to defend, some to destroy. But when we're young, we can't control it well. She paused, her eyes glassy. I hurt someone a long time ago. I didn't mean to. I got scared, and something exploded. She expected him to pull away, to look at her like the others did. But he didn't. He just listened. They put chains on me, not just to bind me, but to suppress the power. She explained. The collar sent electric pulses to my nervous system, keeping my energy asleep. It also silenced my voice, my thoughts. The human reached for the broken collar piece and turned it slowly in his fingers. Advanced tech, cruelly designed. He had seen similar things in old war zones, but never on someone so young. So they were afraid of you, he said quietly. She nodded, afraid, but also greedy. They wanted to sell me to someone who could use me as a weapon. The human leaned back, eyes narrowing. And if those chains are fully removed, what happens then? She didn't answer right away. She stood, walked to the ship's viewing window, and placed her hand on the glass. I don't know, she admitted. I've never felt my full self. There was silence between them. Again, not awkward, just heavy, like something big had entered the room. Finally, the human stood and walked to a drawer. He pulled out a small device, a scanner he had used during the war to check implants. May I? He asked, holding it gently. She nodded slowly, her body tense. He scanned her wrists, neck, and spine. The results made his jaw tighten. There were still microspikes in her nervous system's small metal needles, buried deep under the skin. The collar was gone, but the control system wasn't. Someone had made sure she could never be free. "I can't take them out," he said, his voice low, not without help. "But I know someone who can." Her eyes widened. "Who?" He walked to the pilot chair and typed a code into the console. A map opened coordinates blinking red. "Far from any trade route, old contact of mine." He said, "Illegal doctor, runs a clinic on a hidden moon. He won't ask questions." She hesitated. "Is it safe?" He looked at her. "Nothing is completely safe, but if you want to feel what it's like to be you again, this is the first step." She didn't speak, but she nodded. And just like that, they changed course. The journey took 2 days. In that time, she barely slept. Part of her was excited, the other part, terrified. What if her power came back and she couldn't control it? What if she hurt him? What if the girl she used to be no longer existed? On the 3rd day, they arrived. The moon was dark, covered in clouds. With one lonely building hidden inside a crater, the doctor was old, part mechanical, and smelled like oil and herbs. But his hands were kind, and his eyes sharp. He scanned her body and shook his head slowly. "Whoever did this wanted to erase you," he said. "But they failed. These things can be removed, but it will hurt." She looked at the human, then nodded. "I'm ready." The procedure was done in silence. Wires pulled, spikes melted. Nerves reconnected. She didn't scream, but her fingers crushed the metal bed, her breath coming in sharp. Gasps, the human held her hand the entire time. When it was over, she collapsed in his arms. Shivering, sweating, but her eyes were glowing softly, silver and alive, not because of fear or pain, but because something inside her had returned. The doctor nodded. "She's not broken anymore. Be careful," he warned the human. "She's stronger than you think." He smiled. "I know, back on the ship." She slept for the first time, really slept, and in her dream, she wasn't. In a cage, she was flying, surrounded by stars, and when she woke up, she whispered one word: free. The stars looked calm outside the ship's windows, but inside the human's mind, alarms had already started ringing ever since the girl's implants were removed. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone came looking. She was too valuable, too rare, too dangerous for them to just let her go. She stood in the control room now, wearing a soft gray cloak. Her silver eyes brighter than before. There was strength in the way she walked, and confidence growing in her voice. But the fear hadn't vanished completely. She still jumped at sudden noises, still slept with one eye half open, I think. "I feel something," she said one evening, her gaze fixed on the stars. "Something is searching." The human looked up from his screen, his face suddenly tense. "You feel it?" She nodded, placing her hand over her chest. "It's like a pulse, like someone's calling my name, but not with words." He turned back to the console and checked the long-range scans. For a moment, there was nothing, just the usual dust and echo of nearby trade signals. Then, a ripple appeared, natural, faint, but familiar, a tracking signal masked with deep encryption. He cursed under his breath and stood. "We need to move," he said. "They've found your trail." Her breath caught. "The ones who sold me." "Or the ones who wanted to buy you," he replied. "Could be worse." They left the hidden moon immediately, taking a blind jump into deep space. The stars around them stretched like threads of light as the ship entered jump mode. But it wasn't far enough. A few hours later, the scanners beeped again. 2 ships, fast and armored, were closing in, unknown tags, but the model design screamed military black market. No official emblems, no requests for communication, just silent pursuit like wolves in the dark. She stood behind the pilot's seat, her hands clenched. "I knew they'd come," she whispered. "I always knew they wouldn't let me go." The human adjusted course again. activating stealth systems and rerouting power to shields. But the girl grabbed his arm. "Stop." He looked at her, confused. "If we keep running, they'll chase us forever," she said. "What if I stop hiding?" His jaw tightened. "You don't have to prove anything." She shook her head. "I'm not proving it to them. I'm proving it to myself." The two enemy ships drew closer. Their weapons lit up, and a message appeared on the screen. "Turn over the Valeri subject, or be destroyed." She stepped forward and pressed the come button. Her voice came through clearly. Stronger than before. "No," she said. "She's not here anymore." There was silence on the other end. Then the weapons fired. The ship shook violently as energy blasts hit the shields. Sparks flew across the cockpit, and a red alert screamed through the halls. "Brace yourself." The human shouted, spinning the ship sharply to avoid another strike. But it wasn't enough. They were being pinned, forced into a trap. Then, without warning, she closed her eyes. She reached inward, into the part of her she had feared all. Her life, the part they had locked away with chains and pain. Now it was free. Now it was awake. Her body began to glow, not like fire, but like pure starlight. Her skin shimmered, her hair lifted, and the lights inside the ship flickered. The human turned and stared. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was something ancient and powerful. "I'm tired of running," she said softly, and with one step, she walked to the back of the ship, where the emergency hatch faced the stars. He tried to stop her. "You'll die out there." She turned and smiled gently. "Not if I become who I do." Was meant to be. She opened the hatch just enough to send out her energy, not her body. A burst of raw light exploded from her hands. It wasn't a weapon. It was a message, a warning. A scream of freedom so loud that the enemy ships halted in place. There. Systems crashed. Their lights went dark. Their weapons turned cold. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light faded. She collapsed to the floor. Breathless, he rushed to her side, catching her before her head hit the ground. Her skin was burning. With heat, her pulse fast and unstable, but she was smiling. "They won't follow us now," she whispered. "They know I'm not theirs anymore." The enemy ships floated behind them, dark and disabled, and the human stared out into the quiet. Realizing she had saved them both, he carried her gently to her room and laid her down. She was exhausted, her body still glowing faintly. He covered her with a blanket and sat beside her, watching her breathe. For now, the danger had passed, but something inside her had changed forever. She wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't a weapon. She was a force, and now? They all knew it. The human stood at the ship's window, staring at the wreckage of the enemy vessels. They were still drifting, powerless. Sparks flickering from damaged hulls. He had seen many battles in his life, but never one like this. Not where the weapon was a girl who had once been silent in a cage. Behind him, the room was quiet. She lay under blankets, her breathing slow but steady. The glow in her skin had faded, leaving behind a faint shimmer like stardust on her arms. He hadn't left her side in hours, not to sleep, not to eat. He watched her chest rise and fall, afraid that if he blinked, she might disappear. But she didn't. She was healing faster than he expected. By morning, her eyes opened slowly, and the first thing she whispered was his name. He was stunned. She had never asked for his name before, let alone spoken it with care. He sat beside her, smiling softly. "You scared me?" he said. She gave a weak smile back. "I scared myself, I thought I wouldn't come back," she admitted. But then I remembered something. He tilted his head. "What's that?" "You," she said. "You held my hand." Those simple words struck deep. She had faced darkness with fire, but it was his quiet presence that anchored her to life. After a few hours, she stood up for the first time since the blast. Her legs were shaky, but she walked on her own. They cleaned the ship together, repaired what they could. It was peaceful, almost normal, but peace never lasted long in their world. 3 days later, while docking at a remote fuel station, everything changed. The station was small, just a few buildings, mostly traders and broken-down travelers. They entered a supply room to grab food and ship parts. She wore a hood to hide her features, and he stayed close. Then it happened. A stranger spotted her, tall, with cybernetic implants on his arms and a cruel smile on his face. He spoke into a hidden device, pretending not to look at them again, but she felt it deep inside her, like ice crawling up her back. "They're here," she whispered. The human turned instantly, his instincts sharp. They headed for the exit. Fast, but before they could reach the door, armored men blocked the path. Blasters in hand, visors down, no questions asked. "Step aside," the leader growled. "The girl comes with us." The human stepped in front of her, no weapon in hand, just his body. "She's not going anywhere," he said, firm and cold. The leader laughed. "What are you going to do, old man?" "She's a biological weapon worth millions. She doesn't belong to you." She clenched her fists behind him, her body trembling, not from fear, but from fury. For years, she had been told she belonged to others. Used, sold, beaten, silenced. Now they dared say it again. In front of the only person who had treated her like a soul, the human kept his stance unmoving. "If you want her," he said, "you'll have to kill me first." The attackers didn't hesitate. One raised his blaster and fired. It happened in a blink. She moved faster than light, literally, in one motion. She pushed the human aside and raised her hand. A burst of energy erupted from her palm, forming a shield of shimmering blue light. The blast hit it and vanished. The attackers froze in shock, but she didn't stop. Her cloak flew off as she stepped forward, her silver eyes burning with fire. "You want me," she said, her voice no longer soft. "Come and try," with a wave of her hand. The ground cracked under their feet. One man screamed as his weapon shattered. Another was thrown into a wall by an invisible force. The leader tried to shoot again, but his weapon melted in his hand. She was in control now. No chains, no collar, no fear. They fled, stumbling over each other, shouting into coms for help. But by the time reinforcements came, the girl and the human were gone, vanished into space once again, back on the ship. She sat in silence, her breath heavy. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You saved me," he said quietly. She turned her face to him, her eyes softer now. "I would do it again," she replied. "You were the first person who saw me. Not a weapon, not a thing, but a person." He looked at her for a long time, not with pity, not even with pride, but with something deeper, like respect, like trust. "You're not what they say you are," he said. "You never were." And she smiled, truly smiled. Not because she was free, but because she had chosen to fight, not for survival, but for someone who had stood in front of death. For her. The stars outside drifted slowly, glowing like whispers in the dark. But inside the ship, something even brighter had begun to shine. Not light from energy blasts or fire from a storm, but warmth, quiet and real, like the feeling of being safe. For the very first time, she sat at the main table. Her hood off, her silver hair tied back. She looked older now, not in years, but in spirit. The fear in her eyes had faded, replaced by something strong and something soft. The human poured 2 cups of warm tea, sliding one toward her without a word. They had done this every morning for a week. No alarms, no enemies chasing them. Just silence and breathing and healing. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to run from, and she didn't know what to do with that feeling. "I had a dream last night," she said quietly. He looked up with interest. I was in a forest with stars above and wind all around. There were no cages, no pain, and you were there, she added. But you weren't watching over me. We were just walking. He smiled gently. Sounds like a good dream. She nodded slowly. I didn't want to wake up, but when I did, I wasn't afraid. A moment passed, then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small screen. On it, a name glowed written in a language he didn't recognize. She turned the screen toward him. This is the name I chose, she said. My name. He read it carefully, then asked, What does it mean? She smiled. It means light that returns. It's from my mother's tongue. He looked at her with quiet pride. You carry it well, he said. You've earned it. She lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening slightly. I never had the chance to tell you something. He stayed still, waiting, that day. At the auction, she began, her voice shaking, when you said, I'll take her. I thought it was the end, but it was the beginning. He nodded slowly. For both of us, he replied. She blinked fast, holding back tears. Why did you stay? She asked, through all of it. He leaned forward, his voice low, because someone once saved me when I was worthless. And I swore that if I ever had the chance, I'd do the same for someone else. He paused, then added, and maybe because I saw something in you. What? She asked softly. He looked straight into her silver eyes. Hope. She couldn't stop the tears this time. They fell silently. Not from pain, but from something deeper, from being seen, accepted, and finally wanted. I don't want to be alone anymore, she said, her voice shaking. I don't want to keep moving from place to place. I want to stay. The words surprised even her. But she meant them. Everyone. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Then stay, he said. No chains, no deals, no conditions, just stay. That night, she stood in front of her mirror again. She traced the faint marks on her wrists, but they didn't hurt now. They were memories, not of pain, but of how far she had come. She whispered her name once more, letting it settle into her heart like a seed finally given sunlight. The next morning, she handed the human a small Itima thin cord with a pendant. This belonged to my mother, she said. I want you to have it. He shook his head. It's yours. She smiled. Then I'm giving it to my family. He paused, eyes soft. You think of me like that? She nodded. You're the first real part of it. A day later, they landed on a quiet planet. Green and peaceful, not to hide, but to rest. To rebuild, they stepped out together. The air warm, the sky clear. A new home, a new life, not as master and slave, not as savior and rescued, but as two people who had found each other in the darkest corners of the galaxy and chose to hold on. She ran her fingers through the tall grass and laughed. It was the first time he heard her laugh, light, real, and full of color. He smiled and said, You're not the girl from the cage anymore. She turned to him, her silver eyes glowing with life. No, she said. I'm free, and I'm not alone.